When do we ever record in the morning? Like, this is new, uncharted territory for us.
I am so thrown off and I'm like half asleep still.
I am on my third cup of coffee and ready to run through a brick wall.
Is
So
that why you look crazy?
if I seem a little fired up, that's why.
You're
It's
gonna be like, I'm so angry.
I'm not angry, I promise. I'm just like
I'm just jittery.
amped up. I'm a little jittery. Not gonna lie.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Murder Unscripted. I am your host, Ed Hydock, along with my bestie, the newly dubbed Wikipedia of true crime, Melissa
Whoop, whoop.
Spivey.
Heyo.
We are in our final episode of Block 3 already, and this block was called It Wasn't Me.
A loving throwback to Shaggy's lyrical masterpiece, if you will.
I wouldn't call it a lyrical masterpiece, but it's just a masterpiece. It's a feel good.
Something.
So we've been talking about people who were considered the prime suspect in a murder case. And these were people who were never charged with any crime, but they were definitely suspected by not only law enforcement, but also their peers, their community, their family. I mean, it's detrimental to their reputations and their livelihood. And in our first week, we talked about the Gallaudet University murders that happened in 2000. How Thomas Minch was suspected of the murder of Eric Plunkett and how he was essentially kicked out of the university and the DC area just because police got tunnel vision. In our second week, we talked about their horrifically sad murder of 15-year-old Risa Trexler. And last week, we spoke to a good friend of ours, Jody Laird, who was a suspect in Risa's murder for 35 grueling years. So this week in It Wasn't Me, Melissa is going to take us, she's going to take the lead and kind of share another case with us. And as we do then in the last episode of every block, we'll have a little palate cleanser, a little bit of fun.
We need it after this.
We definitely did.
My story today is going to just ruin everyone's day. So get ready.
Just like every week. You're so good at that.
You know what? Ruining your day makes mine just that much better.
You have a way. You just have a way.
All right, so I'm going to be sharing another case of a wrongfully suspected person, but before we do that, I kind of wanted to touch on like what you should do if you are a suspect in a crime that like you definitely didn't commit. I pulled this information from a whole bunch of different criminal attorneys, and I have a few suggestions and all the things I'm going to tell you. This is your rights in the United States. I'm not sure about other countries, but at least in the US, these are the rules. And I want to make it very clear that neither Ed nor I are lawyers or anything in the criminal justice world, so do not take this information.
How do you know?
How do I know what? That you're not a lawyer?
That's very presumptuous.
You've never won an argument with me.
That's, you know why?
So,
my clients always settle. That's just how good I am. I don't even have to argue.
you'd be an ambulance chaser. Anyway.
Oh, all day.
It's a paper cut. Wear this neck brace. You're fine.
Oh.
All right. Well, if you're ever a suspect in a crime, which I hope you're not, one of the first things you should ask the police is, am I in custody or am I free to leave? If you are not in custody, if they say you are free to leave, get up and leave. Stop the interview, leave at any time. And again, if you aren't sure, you need to ask. And then if they do let you leave, you should really still go home, call an attorney, figure out your next steps, because this is not going to go away. So if you are in custody and you are not free to leave, you should ask for a lawyer immediately. So one of the only things that cannot be used against you is your silence. This is your Fifth Amendment right, so even if you're innocent, use it. Just shut up. Your mantra at the time should be remain calm, stay silent, and ask for a lawyer.
We have seen this over the past 3 weeks, just how even when you're innocent, you may not know the right things to say, or may not know
Mm-hmm.
how to act when you're faced with this. And I can imagine it's nerve wracking to be in a room with detectives when a murder's happened and they're looking at you. So that's why we suggest getting a lawyer, even if you're innocent, just to make sure that you're saying the right things. Otherwise, we see what bad things can happen.
Another thing to keep in mind, if police ask to search your property, so your car, your home, your person, the backpack you're carrying, whatever, ask for a search warrant. And if they don't have one, do not give them permission to search anything without that warrant. This is your Fourth Amendment right. So again, use it. All right. So we have 4 things to remember. So I created a little acronym for this. So pay attention. Laws. LAWS. So L, lawyer up. A, ask if you're under arrest. W, warrant required for search. And S, stay silent. So remember laws.
When you had brought this idea to me, I was so on board because as we've seen, this is just your rights are so incredibly important. All of this information that you just provided comes from the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment, and they are designed to protect you. And innocent people go to prison all the time for things they did not do. They're subjected to harassment, they're subjected to suspicion, and it ruins them. So absolutely know your rights.
Absolutely. Laws.
I like it. I like it. You could have went
Right?
with any acronym and
First,
made
I
it
had
work.
also, and I was like, that doesn't sound good. And I was like, but I'm going to trademark this. TM, guys.
Melissa owns the word laws now.
Yes, I do. Paris Hilton tried to do it with That's Hot. I can do it with laws. So this is the story of the innocent, yet infamous, hero turned zero, a man by the name of Richard Jewell. And this case is wild. I knew about it, but I did not know everything. And this innocent man went through 88 days of just absolute hell due to a phenomenon called trial by media. Ed, are you familiar with the phrase trial by media?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is I guess it's kind of a term used to describe the impact of the media on a person's reputation, meaning they've been smeared by television, by newspapers who create this widespread perception of someone's guilt or innocence before any kind of legal proceeding has happened. And that's exactly what happened to Thomas Minchin Gallaudet. Ran him right out of town.
It's insane. And there's actually a ton of famous cases of this happening to people across the world. One of the big ones that first came to mind was Amanda Knox. She was that American woman who was suspected and charged, but ultimately acquitted of murdering her roommate while she was living in Italy. She was exonerated in 2015, but that case was everywhere. It was on the cover of every magazine and tabloid. It was always on the news. You just couldn't get away from it. And I feel like it was pretty much decided immediately by the media that Amanda was guilty. Another famous case, and I'm sure you've heard of this, but Azaria Chamberlain. Does that case ring a bell?
It does, and I can't put my finger on it.
All right.
I don't, who is
Here's
that?
a hint. An Australian case involving a dingo.
Oh, she's the dingo. The dingo ate your baby.
Yeah.
Did you know that Gilmore, so my cattle dog, is actually part dingo? That's how they were bred. They're half dingo and half blue merle. That's how dingoes were, or that's how blue healers were made.
Our little Gil's a dingo.
He acts
What's
like
that, everybody? We learned I'm going to call it a Fido fun fact.
That's pretty good. Trademark that while you're on the trademark kick.
TM.
Write him a letter.
Maybe I will. All right. So in 1980, 9-week-old Azaria Chamberlain was stolen from her family's tent while camping by a pack of dingoes. And no one believed this story, though. And her mother, Lindy, she was eventually sentenced to life in prison, where she sat for 6 long years until it was proven that Azaria was taken by a pack of dingoes. And I didn't know this until I was researching for this case, but they ultimately found a piece of Azaria's jacket in a dingo cave lair.
It was in the den. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild.
And really, the only reason that they found like this jacket in this dingo lair was because a man was climbing nearby. He fell and died. And when they found his body, they found the piece of the jacket. And like, apparently, where he fell was not easy to reach. So, like, had he not fallen, and unfortunately, he did pass away, but had that not happened, Lindy could still be in jail.
Absolutely. That's incredible. I did not know that little fact. I knew they found clothing. I didn't know the circumstances. That's wild.
Right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's sad. It took a man dying to clear her, but
Right.
I mean, so this entire trial was publicized, and holy shit, people went crazy. And every single thing that Lindy did was under the microscope. Like, the media just spun everything she did and just trashed her from really day one. And just like what happened to Jody, she told us about last week, she was judged for not grieving her sister in the air quotes appropriate way. Well, people use Lindy Chamberlain's demeanor as an indication of her guilt. And in reality, like, this mother just lost her child and is now being dragged through the mud. Like, I'm sure she was so physically, mentally, and emotionally drained that there was no emotion left to give. We're lucky she was still standing, right? Like,
Right.
And the sad part about this whole case is the whole phrase, a dingo took my baby or a dingo ate my baby, it's been turned into a joke.
Elementary school, this joke was circulating, and it's like I didn't at the time understand where it came from. People would just be like, the dingo ate your baby, and I was like,
yes.
So, and first of all, that's British, which makes no sense. That's the way I do. But like it was a joke that I eventually I would say it then because other people were saying it, and I really didn't know why. I knew about the case, but it is sad that turned into a joke because of it.
It almost became like something in pop culture. Like, there's an episode of The Office, and Kevin says something about dingo babies. Like,
right? It's
and
lived on.
How many years later was that? 30 years later? Like, that's crazy.
It is.
All right, so let's get to our main case today, and that is the story of Richard Jewell. And there's a really fantastic and super detailed article from the February 1997 issue of Vanity Fair entitled American Nightmare, The Ballad of Richard Jewell, which was written by Marie Brenner. And I relied a lot on that article as a source for this. And I would recommend everyone give it a quick read. It has a lot of like flowery language and everything, but ultimately at the core, it's a really interesting article. So Richard Allensworth Jewell, whose birth name was Richard White, was born on December 17th, 1962 in Danville, Virginia. And the reason for this name change was because after his parents divorced, he was really young. He was adopted by his mother's husband, so he changed his last name to his last name, Jewell.
Gotcha.
Yeah. They relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, and throughout his childhood and adult years, I feel like Richard always wanted to be the teacher's pet, which I can relate to this. I am in grade A kiss ass, and I am not even ashamed to admit it.
If there was a grade higher than A, like, can you get an A plus kiss ass?
I would get an A plus. I would ask for extra credit in being the kiss ass. Yeah.
It has gotten you very far in life, though. So
right.
There's that.
I know. A little brown on my nose. I get it. So Richard always went above and beyond in school and at work. And this sounds great, right? But sometimes he took it a notch or 10 too far, often being described as overzealous and once referred to as a badge-wearing zealot. So that takes kiss ass to a whole other level. And I think we all know someone like this. Like, do you remember the high school hall monitor who took their little bit of power to like dictator levels?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately for Richard, he was often demoted or even asked to resign from positions, like due to this hyper vigilant over eagerness to please. I have a few examples of his extreme dedication to his jobs.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, right. I'm trying to do it nicely. So at one point, he was working as a security guard in an apartment complex as like a part-time job. And keep in mind, at this time, he was also working as a jailer for the sheriff's office, but these were two completely different positions. So he's at the apartment complex job one night and he gets a noise complaint. So he goes to deal with it and he ends up being arrested for impersonating an officer. So, and I understand why. Like, he allegedly went up to these people with a 9mm handgun and handcuffs that he had on him.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah, no. So, with that charge of impersonating a police officer, he ended up pleading to a lesser charge. He didn't get charged with impersonating an officer, but he was sentenced to parole and a psychiatric evaluation. So at one point, this is later, Richard was working at Piedmont College on their campus police force, and he quickly made enemies with the student body, his colleagues, and his superiors. And again, I can see both sides. Like, he broke up parties and busted underage drinkers. Supposedly, he wrote citations for really minor infractions, but like, to him, someone was breaking the rules and they should be punished.
Right.
But again, he kind of took it to another level. Like, he would tell their parents, which resulted in a bunch of students filing complaints about him to this guy named Ray Clear. Remember his name. We'll come back to him.
Okay.
He
Right.
was the president of the college at that point. So
He was
unfortunately-
Richard was a narc. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what he was, and nobody. I mean, anybody that's cool doesn't like a narc. there's no other way to say it, you know.
You are the epitome of cool.
You know what? I was thinking that this morning when I woke up. That's the first thing I thought
Yikes.
of. God, you're
I
cool.
believe it. You're so cool. So, all right, there was one time at Piedmont College, and I am laughing. So he chased a speeding vehicle onto the highway, and I don't know exactly how it ended, but his bosses are like, "What the hell are you doing? That is not the job of a campus police officer. Like, that's not even our area." Like, apparently, they only had jurisdiction like 500 feet outside of the
Off the
school.
campus, right?
Yeah, and there he is chasing
Speeding down the
people
highway.
highway. And apparently he had a thing for car chases, which he would go after these people and then he would generally crash his patrol car.
Oh God, laying out
So-
spike strips and stuff.
Yeah, like, I don't know what he was thinking, but
He was an enforcer. That's what he was thinking. My job is to enforce this, and I probably something clicked that was like, doesn't matter what happens now. It's my responsibility. I'm the lawman. It's my job to
Right.
stop this evil
I
doer.
am the law.
Yeah.
So he kept getting in hot water with his superiors at the college, including Ray Clear. So it should be noted that Richard believed the school reprimanded him because of all the stuff he was stopping, like the underage drinking and the constant partying was making the college look bad.
Well, and isn't Piedmont? Aren't they mostly Baptist students? So they may have
Yes.
been like a little extra because they're from that strict upbringing. Now they're letting loose. So I imagine it was rowdier. I would guess.
Oh, I agree with you. They probably had their first taste of freedom after a super strict upbringing. I saw something about a lot of kids were PKs, which are preachers' kids. But, that didn't mean that Richard needed to do things that were outside his job description, like chasing people down the highway. So Richard resigns from Piedmont, and in May of 1996, he moved in with his mother in Atlanta, Georgia. She was going to have surgery, and he was going to help her while she recuperated. And it worked out well because the 1996 Summer Olympics were coming up, being held in Atlanta, and he knew there would be plenty of open security guard positions for him to work. Everything's being held at Centennial Park in Atlanta, Georgia. And this was a big, big deal because it's the 100-year anniversary of the 1896 Olympic Games in Athens, which was like considered the first modern day Olympics. And Muhammad Ali had been there to kick off the games by lighting the Olympic cauldron, which I didn't know was a thing.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was.
I know
and it
about
was,
the torch, but I didn't know there was a cauldron.
Yeah, it's like a bucket with just for that year. I don't know if that's every year, but
I just
Yeah, it
think
was-
of like a cauldron with like Eye of Newt and
no, this was just it's an actual thing, a cauldron.
well, Muhammad Ali was there to hang out with the cauldron that year.
Yeah.
So on Friday, July 26, 1996, Richard was scheduled to work at Centennial Park, which is where I think he was working like a 12-hour overnight, so a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. So Richard gets there and he reports to his post at the AT&T Sound and Light Tower, which was by some music stages because there were going to be concerts that night. Like, they went all out for these Olympic Games. I actually work in the security industry, so a lot of these things with Richard are kind of making me laugh because I've encountered some of these guards who are like, "Oh, I'm so important," and yeah. So
Don't let any of them hear. I hope none of them listen.
I know.
Can you
Oof,
name them? Ryan
Absolutely
is
not.
so.
Well, because I work in that industry, like, I have no doubt that each and every security officer had a very, very specific, well planned out and choreographed position. Like, this stuff was probably planned years in advance. It's like showing up to a movie set. Everyone has a specific spot and you need to be in it.
When I worked for you for a hot second there, right after
Yes.
my well planned out and choreographed position was outside a used car lot, making sure no one touched the Kias.
And I do appreciate your report about the very suspicious bunny.
Nothing
Moving
happened
on.
that night. Nothing happened. Anyway,
All right. So at this point, it's very late on Friday, July 26th, possibly even Saturday morning at this point, July 27th. And Richard sees some young people hanging out at benches, and he notices that they are not only intoxicated, but they are littering.
ooh, I'm guessing Richard wasn't about to stand by while some drunken litter bugs, not on his watch.
Not on his watch. Oh my goodness. No, no, no. He was not about to, not, no. So he tells them to clear out. And I can just see him like walking up and straightening his pants, like, all right, let's go. Like,
Yeah.
so he tells them to clear out. And as they walk away, he notices there's an olive green backpack laying under the bench. And he calls out to the kids that he just shooed away. And he's like, come back and get this. And they're like, it's not ours. It was there when we sat down. So Richard's like, oh shit, here's a random backpack with no discernible owner. This could be bad. And he's right. I mean, that's what they're trained to look for. So Richard alerts a man named Tom Davis, who was an agent with the GBI, or the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And they immediately start clearing the area and getting people to evacuate. So during this time, Richard also went to that AT&T sound and light tower I talked about. So
Yeah.
he went to that at 2 separate times to warn the people working in there that they needed to get out. So I believe this bench was positioned like kind of at the base of the tower.
I feel like that's the right thing to do, for
Oh, yes.
like for all of that, like going above and beyond stuff that led him to that moment. Like this was what he was supposed to do.
Yeah. And I mean, he saved so many people. So shortly after this, at about 1:25 a.m. on Saturday, July 27th, 1996, the backpack, which contained 3 pipe bombs, explodes. Shrapnel goes everywhere, and the pipe bombs had nails in them to cause maximum devastation. And people talk about how it was just like this went off and then it was just silence.
That stuff
Oof.
exploded like buckshot. I mean, these people aren't just they're trying to do as much damage as possible. And that's terrifying.
So unfortunately, 2 people were killed. One was killed in the explosion, and one was actually a cameraman who had a heart attack when he was running to the site of the explosion.
It's awful.
And there were reportedly 111 people injured. But seriously, had this backpack not been found, and the FBI and the other security officers, had they not cleared this area, the death toll would have been massive. I mean, this would have been devastating.
Could you imagine too if this went off in the middle of the day? Like this was 1:25 in the morning. Man, if this would have been, I get that there were still lingering people and a lot of people, but I mean, if this went off during the day while that place was hopping, wow.
It's just awful. And I should mention that shortly before the explosion, a bomb threat was called into 911, and the caller said, quote, "There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes.
Whoa.
And
Wow.
they do believe that this was the person who planted the bomb, and the call was made from a payphone a few blocks away from the park.
Why wouldn't they take that seriously? I mean, is it like,
So,
because I guess the guy said he didn't really give a spot. It's just like Centennial Park. I mean,
Right. Well, and it ended up actually being less than 30 minutes. So from my research, it seems like they just didn't get all the information to the people who needed it in time.
right. Okay, that makes sense.
So suddenly, Richard Jewell, this quiet, unassuming Joe Schmo, is thrust into the spotlight. And for 3 days, he is America's sweetheart. He is on the Today Show with Katie Couric. He's on CNN. And people loved him. They loved him. He was this like shy, bashful Southern boy who answered everything with yes, ma'am and no, sir, and had this whole like all shucks kind of vibe.
Yeah, he was the goofy. He was like a goofy security guard. He's like you fall in love with him.
Yes, and he was clearly uncomfortable with all the attention, which just made him even more like endearing, you know?
Yeah.
And here's this feel-good story like hometown boy saves the day and it's great, and then the fallout. 3 days after the bomb goes off, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper prints a special edition with a story on the front page with the following headline: FBI suspects hero guard may have planted bomb. And with that one headline, Richard Jewell's life flipped upside down. This story comes out, and other newspapers and news stations just jumped on this bandwagon, and the media just ran freaking wild. Like, every single thing that we talked about that people initially loved about Richard Jewell all of a sudden came back to haunt him. It was like people loved the shy, good old boy vibe until he was a suspect, and then the narrative suddenly changed to, oh, he's a weird loner who lives with his mom. And he became the butt of all these jokes. Like, apparently Jay Leno started calling him the Unidoofus. Like,
That's messed up.
The Unabomber, but the Unidoofus. Like,
That's wrong. It's so wrong.
And you shouldn't be joking about this when two people just died, too.
Right.
Like,
right.
That just seems in poor taste. So
Right.
newspapers and reporters just made everything worse. It was like they were upping the ante. Like, first it was, oh, an arrest could come as soon as tomorrow. And then it was like, an arrest is coming today. And this is an actual quote from NBC's Tom Brokaw, who at one point was like a big deal in the news. Like, he was up there with like Dan Rather and Peter Jennings.
Like decades. Yeah, he was. Yeah, A-list.
So Brokaw said this on a broadcast, quote, "They probably have enough to arrest him right now, probably enough to prosecute him, but you always want to have enough to convict as well," end quote. A kind of an issue with major news reporting using probably throughout their entire like discussion about him.
It's very irresponsible. It is
irresponsible journalism, absolutely.
Yeah, and but I'm not. Are you surprised in the least? I mean, look at it's so. This is what the media does. It is all about who can put out the most salacious story the quickest way possible. Like, it doesn't matter if the facts are right. It's like how quick can we break a story? And it's even if it's half of it's true or half of the facts are unknown, we're saying it first. So come to us for all your news. Like, it's sad. It's awful.
It is sad. It's all about the numbers. In regard to the irresponsible journalism, in 2019, Clint Eastwood directed and released a movie about Richard Jewell, which stirred up some controversy, actually, about where the tips and info about Richard being a suspect actually came from. And I'm not going to go into it here, but it was definitely worth looking into. And it was kind of funny because the media got their feelings hurt about how they were portrayed in the movie. And I'm like, you're like, we're doing to you exactly what you do to everyone else.
I didn't see that, but did Clint Eastwood play Richard Jewell? Because how freaking cool would that, like, get off my park bench.
No, what would he be, an elderly Richard Jewell? Like,
you didn't throw that gum wrapper on the floor, did you?
No,
sir. See, I would be scared of him.
I don't know who played Richard Jewell, but Kathy Bates played his mother, and apparently she was, I mean, it's Kathy Bates. Everything she does is phenomenal.
Everything she does is also a crazy mother, so that makes total sense.
I'm in love with her.
She's awesome. She's a great actress.
I know. Yeah. So the newspapers and news reporters and everybody is just ripping Richard Jewell apart. And suddenly, everyone comes out of the woodwork to talk about anything and everything, even with someone saying at one point, Richard, I think, owned a backpack similar to the one with the bombs.
Everyone owns one of those.
Exactly. And then, like, people were saying how Richard Jewell was approaching newspapers and talk shows to interview him about everything, feeding more into this hero complex thing. Apparently, none of that ever happened. He never went to anyone and said, hey, interview me. But that was part of the narrative. Like, he set this bomb because he wanted to be a hero.
And the problem is you have no idea where these rumors come from, so they just start
Right.
circulating, but no one ever owns up to saying them, and they continue to destroy these people's lives.
Absolutely. Another thing that was reported, it was reported that he had a bunch of guns in his home. But A, the real number, or if he had any, what kind he had, it was never reported. And B, according to an article from the New York Times, he had at one point served as like a gun instructor or trainer. So I don't think that's unusual for someone who teaches people how to use guns to own guns.
I'm still dying to know how, I guess, all of this started and how Richard Jewell came on the FBI's radar, because that article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about the hero guard turned mad bomber, like what did they supposedly uncover? Do you know?
The reason the FBI even started looking at Richard Jewell is because they got a tip from Richard's former employer, the
Oh,
president
that dude,
of Piedmont, Ray Clear.
Right.
The same Ray Clear who once referred to Richard as a badge-wearing zealot.
That's their source.
That's their source.
Yeah,
so they get this tip from Ray Clear that Richard was problematic and overzealous, and he was obsessed with police officers. So they begin looking at Richard. And of course, they see that he's had some issues at his past jobs, and he's worked in security, law enforcement, etc. And suddenly they're like, that's weird. And there's something else. So not long before all this stuff happened with Richard, there had been a serial arsonist in California. And it turned out actually to be a firefighter who, again, wanted to look like a hero. And I'm 99.99% positive there's a Forensic Files episode on that case.
Oh, there's at least one. I mean, I can think of two off the top of my head. I mean, I smell a theme idea. Like
I know.
Yep, because this happens more often than you think. I mean, these public servants security guards, firefighters, police officers, they know these spaces inside and out. They know routines. They're trained to learn these spaces, and they think they're smart enough to pull off the perfect crime using that kind of insider information that they have.
Right.
Happens all the time.
Absolutely. So I do understand why they looked at Richard Jewell. However, I read a case study from Columbia University about how the media influenced this case, and it talked about how the FBI pretty much knew Richard didn't commit the crime like super early in the case. Because remember how I told you there was an anonymous bomb threat called into 911 right before the bomb went off?
Yeah.
Well, they were able to track that to a payphone, and it was a short distance from the spot that the bomb exploded. But time-wise, it really wouldn't have worked that Richard could have been at his post, planted the bomb, gone to make the phone call, and gotten back to his post before the bomb went off.
But why wouldn't that come out earlier, before he was drugged through the mud? You know, that seems like pretty cursory detective work.
I do not want to say anything other than this is a speculation. This is my own opinion on it. I feel like they needed to close a case. This was so much pressure. And you got to remember, like, this wasn't just Gallaudet University who was upset. This was the World Olympics. Like, literally the entire world
was watching this whole thing unfold.
Right. And they wanted answers. So back to the not enough time for him to do this. Like, the payphone was close to the site, but it was not a close for him, who wasn't in the best shape, to hoof it back in time to A, notify the GBI agent, B, start evacuating, C, go to the light and sound tower, because remember, he went there twice to evacuate it. It just, time-wise, it really couldn't have worked. But once that news article came out, the whole, like, well, there isn't enough time to commit this crime thing just didn't seem to matter anymore to the FBI. And it didn't seem to matter that the person who called in the bomb had no accent. And as we talked about, anyone who hears Richard speak, he has a deep Southern accent.
Doesn't this remind you of, and we do our best to stay out of politics, but the recent events with the Secret Service and people being notified about something that's going to happen, and it still happens?
We're going to stay out of everything.
We sure are, but it has vibes.
Yes. So, speaking of the FBI, shortly after everything happened, during those first 3 days of fame and accolades and Richard's amazing, but after Ray Clear called the FBI, So the FBI comes to Richard's mom's house, and according to Richard Jewell himself, and I got this from that Vanity Fair article I mentioned in the beginning, Jewell claimed that the FBI came to his door. Quote, "They told me they wanted to come with them to headquarters to help them make a training film to be used at Quantico." End quote. So they lied to Richard, basically saying, "Oh, we're going to ask you some questions, but it's no big deal. No big. Just come on down to the headquarters with us." So at first, Richard is pumped.
Well, yeah.
Like he was going to be in an FBI training video. That is like,
Well, and that could have been his way to clear himself too, clear his own name.
well, at this point, he had to. He thought everything was still fine. So this goes on for like this training video, quote unquote, goes on for a while. And at one point, they even Mirandized him
You're
while
kidding.
still pretending it was part of the training.
That is so disgusting and just
Right?
absolute dirty tactics.
It
Wow.
is.
It's like they're
So-
praying. You mentioned he was this kind of dopey Southern guy.
Yeah.
So it's like they're preying on this rube mentality, and that's so shitty.
Well, and again, like we talked about with no black and white with Richard, like I think that with the law, there was no black and white. And I almost feel like with people, there was no black and white. You were a good person or you were a bad person. And if these people work for the FBI, they're good people. Like that's, I think, just how he viewed the world. So Richard's going along with this training video with no problems until they start asking him to sign things. And finally, he's like, I don't feel comfortable with this. I feel like I need a lawyer. And
Good
of
for him.
course, the agents were like, "What? Why would you need a lawyer? We're just hanging out. We're just having a friendly chat. And as friends, we can tell each other things. So anything you want to get off your chest?"
shady.
Right? And Richard's like, "No, what do you mean? Like, of course not."
Right.
So he does call a lawyer. This gentleman, Watson Bryant, was kind of like Richard's mentor and bestie, like I am to you.
Oh, so Watson constantly berated Richard about his age and how lame he is and uncool, and I'm a protected class.
Oh, please, there is nothing classy about you, sir. Anyway, so Watson Bryant, this gentleman who was a good friend of Richard's, he wasn't even a criminal defense attorney, but he did everything in his power to help and protect Richard. And in some of the articles, they talk about how Richard was just very upset and angry about everything, but he didn't lash out. Watson Bryant lashed out for him. Like he was like a stage mom. Like he was like
his mouthpiece. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, somebody had to. I mean, this guy was again railroaded.
Absolutely. Like
they were trying to trick him every way from Sunday to try to get him to confess or to find evidence against him, and so somebody had to stand up for him.
Yeah, he needed someone. So for 88 days, this goes on. Richard couldn't leave his mother's apartment. Like the media was just camped out 24/7. And the feds were there as well, providing 24/7 surveillance. And this part is sick, but I'm going to tell it to you. And so at one point in August of 1996, so this is like the following month after the bombings, and we still have a way long to go until we figure out, till he's cleared. But a writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which kind of started this whole mess, and I'm going to name this guy because he chose to write this. Dave Kindred wrote a piece where he compared Richard Jewell to Wayne Williams. Do you know who that is?
The Atlanta child murder. You got to be kidding me.
Yes. Wayne Williams.
So now you're going from this security guard who his mentality is, I'm just doing what's right, to now he's being compared to the Atlanta child murderer.
Yes.
Makes total sense.
The very same Wayne Williams, who was eventually convicted for 2 murders, but his count is suspected to be way, way, way higher.
Can you imagine?
We're both like
Jewell.
Speechless because that jump is so asinine.
And it happens though, and that it happened to Richard Jewell. And
Yeah,
that's freaking awful. This guy's got to live with now being compared to a child murderer when he's a security guard
exactly.
who found a backpack.
Yes. And like,
Unreal.
so this guy, Dave Kindred, writes, quote, federal agents came to this town to deal with another suspect who lived with his mother. Like this one, that suspect was drawn to the blue lights and sirens of police work. Like this one, he became famous in the aftermath of the murder, unquote. Wow.
It's so disheartening, and it's I don't know if it's tunnel vision or just low hanging fruit or what, but maybe it's the allure, like you said earlier, about solving a big case like nabbing the Olympic bomber.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know, but I'll tell you what. Next time we talk to Steve Peelan, the NYPD detective who was on in our first block, I
Yes.
would love to get this from a cop's perspective as to when these high profile cases happen, is that drive to solve it increased due to the media attention?
Right.
I'll bet you money it
Absolutely.
is.
Oh, I'm
And then,
sure it is because you're getting this pressure on you.
mm-hmm.
So later, this Dave Kindred guy tries to defend himself, and he's like, "Oh, no, I wasn't comparing the two men. No, I was comparing the media frenzy. Get it? Huh? Shut the
It's
fuck up."
for real. Like, people have no idea how damaging words can be, and you can hide behind a computer screen online, but when you publish these things, whether what you're saying is true or not, reputations can be ruined in the blink of an eye. Look at just the one wrong tweet, and the
Oh,
masses are lighting their torches and lining up to just they're looking for your home address. It's insane, and you
people get
really,
canceled
yes,
left
they
and
do.
right.
You have to watch what you say, and obviously social media didn't exist in 96, but it's the same thing. You run these articles in the paper. Richard Jewell's name is now attached to this bombing, and all he did was find the backpack.
And it's interesting when I mentioned to a couple people in my close circle that we were going to cover this case, they were all like, all of them said, "Oh, the Olympic bomber guy." But he didn't
Right.
do it. Like, and they know he didn't do it, but that's what he's like, that's what he's tied to. Oh, the Olympic bomber guy. Well, no.
Yeah, the fact that I was 16 when this happened, and Richard Jewell's name is the name I associate with this crime. I do it too, just because you heard it so often. And obviously, I know how the story ends, but
Right.
you hear Olympic bombing, and I was 16, didn't care, it wasn't in true crime, didn't care about anything at that point. But you say Richard Jewell, I'm like, oh, the Olympic Park bombing. Like, it just his name's
Exactly.
tied to it in some way.
So finally, in late October 1996, I believe October 26th, so it was actually like 3 months to the day because the bomb went off. Well, the bomb went off early July 27th. So we went from July to August, September. Now we're at the end of October. Richard Jewell received a letter from the FBI clearing him. And if you thought this letter was going to take responsibility for, ruining Richard's life, or even like a, "Hey there, P.S., we're sorry we ruined your life," joke's on you, fool. Because that letter, which had absolutely no apology, stated in part, quote, "This is to advise you that based on the evidence developed to date, your client, Richard Jewell, is not considered a target of the federal criminal investigation into the bombing on July 27th, 1996 at Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta. Barring any newly discovered evidence, this status will not change. I am hopeful that Mr. Jewell will provide further cooperation as a witness in the investigation." End
Oh, they
quote.
didn't bother with an edible arrangement or
Wow.
and come on, everything they did to Richard. It would have been nice to at least kind of address this, maybe a public apology, but I don't know.
And it
It's
wasn't even
just
really to him, like it was to his lawyer, like to read to
right,
him. And
right.
I love how they're like, "Well, we're hoping that you're still going to be cool with us." Like, I'd be like, "Absolutely not. I'm not helping you with anything ever."
They convicted him publicly and now are just
Mm-hmm.
asking for him to play nice, and it's like, go, you know what, go, suck it.
Trial by media.
Yep.
But think about all the other people, all these people who were injured, the people who lost someone. Like the woman who was killed by the explosion was 41-year-old Alice Hawthorne. She was there with her daughter. Like, going to the Olympics, something you think you're going to share with your child. It's going to be this big moment. And that happens.
So tragic.
It's so tragic. So who really bombed the Olympics? 29-year-old Eric Robert Rudolph. He was a grade A douchebag, and he was in white supremacist groups, so I really just don't feel the need to go into a whole lot of detail about him. He doesn't deserve it.
Enough said.
Yeah.
I remember it being a huge manhunt for a while too, like 5 years they were hunting for this guy.
Well, and in between the Olympic bombing and when he was finally arrested, he went on to plant 4 more bombs, killing 1, injuring several. And I mean, not to mention all the structural damage to the buildings and everything else, but he killed an off-duty police officer. He seriously injured a nurse. Like, he was just terrible. And this reminds me of what happened in our first case in week 1. Like, Benjamin Varner was murdered because the wrong person was suspected, and investigators got tunnel vision and the murderer wasn't caught. So, like, because this guy wasn't caught back in 96, all this other horrible stuff happened. Like,
yep. Did they ever give a motive? Like, I forget why Eric Rudolph planted the bombs.
He was mad about political shit. Wah, aren't we all?
Who is it?
Like,
yeah.
So
you don't go around planting bombs, but go.
No,
continue.
like, get over it, dude. So
Yeah.
in 2005, Eric Idiot Face Rudolph, which is his new name, he did take a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. Just going to be quiet about that one. And was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. So, as the queen of true crime, Anne Rule says, he got LWOP'd.
Life without parole. Yeah.
LWOP'd. I love that.
She's good.
So hopefully he's having the worst time ever in jail, and I hope every morning he wakes up and steps on a Lego piece.
That's the worst. That's the worst punishment you can get.
It really is.
God.
But it took until his confession in 2005 for Richard Jewell to be fully exonerated.
Awful.
Now, I will say Richard Jewell did go on to sue several media outlets who trashed him, including NBC, CNN, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and quite a few other media outlets. And he won or settled with most of them. However, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the ones who started all this with that headline, they were like, nope, we're fighting you. We're not gonna settle. So ultimately, the Supreme Court did eventually dismiss this libel suit against them, which I hate. But the court was basically like, well, at the time, we all did think that he was a suspect, so it wasn't necessarily false information at the time.
But until they get sued, these things are going to continue to happen. These defamation cases are important because they're the only things. When you hit them in the wallet, that's when people will stop running their mouth about things that aren't true.
Right. And as I kind of said before, I'm not going to go into, how that tip got to the paper, and how a lot of the information was passed along. But if you're interested, I would suggest looking into it or potentially watching that Richard Jewell movie by Clint Eastwood. I have not seen it, but I do think I'm going to watch it. One more thing, just to add to this tragic story of Richard Jewell. I just feel like his life is just so tragic.
It's sad. Yeah.
August 29th, 2007, Richard Allensworth Jewell passed away from heart disease, which stemmed from complications from his diabetes. His wife came home from work and found him dead in their bedroom. He was 44 years old. And at that point, it was 2007. He had only been exonerated 2 years ago.
Right. That would have been his new lease on life the moment that happened. That is a shame that it ended that way.
What a tragically short life and a tragically sad life.
And just the whole thing was a tragedy. I know it spoiled the Olympics that year when it happened. I do remember that. And you rarely hear in Olympic coverage about a crime, a bombing. That became as important as the Olympics at that point.
Yeah.
So it is just a sad story. And I can't thank you enough for bringing this case up, because it is a perfect example of what we've been talking about this entire block. This case was so well known, at least for us old heads. But, and I doubt anyone has ever really given a thought about what Richard Jewell went through. hopefully this one and the others that we've profiled have given you all a taste of what it's like to be considered a suspect in a case that you really had nothing to do with it. So
Yeah.
that does it for the It Wasn't Me block.
It wasn't
Next
me.
month, wasn't me. Next month, we are going to be discussing a kind of a much broader topic, and one that has been covered by every podcast, every show, every network under the sun, survivor stories. And
Mhm.
we're going to have some different perspectives and different insight. And then in week 3, as we do, we're going to have a guest.
Yes.
And this guest is a survivor of a horrific attack from a man who had already done the unthinkable just months before this encounter that she had. So you absolutely will not want to miss that. So before we leave you, as we do with every block, we like to kind of end on a little palate cleanser where I like to test Melissa's true crime knowledge. She thinks she's all that, and I like to prove she's not. I like to prove
She
she's
knows she's all that. Thank you.
I like to prove that she's a colossal fraud. So you've done pretty good so far. You've been, I think, 9 out of 10 on trivia questions. So
Mhm.
I thought I'd mix it up because clearly trivia is too easy for you. So we're going to do something a little different that
Oh boy.
it's more about your memory and less about your crime knowledge. So, and you, for this, you can thank one of our listeners named Aubrey. So shout out to Aubrey, who has been following us from day one. And she brought this topic up and brought it to my attention. I thought we'd do something a little different. So we kind of combined forces to bring you this one. So the reason this topic came up is because John Wayne Gacy, everyone's favorite clown serial killer,
Ugh.
he produced at least 2,000 paintings over the course of his lifetime, claiming, I don't consider myself an artist, but what talent I have, I consider a gift from God. And what I do with my gift is give it to God.
Gag me.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
Such
So,
a douche.
so on October 31st of this year, Material Culture, it's an auction house in Philadelphia, sold a couple of his paintings, including the famous Pogo the Clown, right, from 1985, which it is Gacy's original, and it sold for $12,800.
Wow.
In this like spooky themed kind of sale that they had. So I'm going to show you 5 paintings of John Wayne Gacy's, and then I'm going to ask you a question about them. Are you ready, Melissa, to play Art Attack?
Art, as in A-R-T, like art?
Art Attack.
Okay.
All right,
I'm ready.
here we go. Okay, so here is one of Gacy's paintings. It's a picture of Mickey Mouse. It's in a frame, and it's Mickey holding up a top hat. I'm going to stop screen sharing now. The question for you, true or false? You can see both of Mickey's ears.
True. Hey, put it back up. What are you talking about? You can see both.
The one's hidden by his
You
hand.
can see like half of that one.
All right, you know what? Tell you what, we'll give you half a point on that one.
Okay.
But you got to be very clear. Like, this was you had a 50% chance to begin with, and now you're going to start playing, I call shenanigans, is what I call. But
Shenanigans.
we'll give you partial credit. Okay. Picture number 2. This is a picture of a skull. It's got an orange background, a little bit of blood under it, and the skull is kind of made up of some different designs. So, Melissa, my question for you. How many naked women are depicted on the top of the skull? I guess it would be the forehead.
I think there were 2.
Sorry, there are 3. There's a butt that I considered.
Oh, Jesus.
I considered part of a.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it was 3.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay.
All right. The next photo we have is a drawing or a sketch of Jesus Christ, and he's wearing the crown of thorns, and he's just kind of on a peach-colored background. So my question for you is, which direction is Jesus looking?
To his right.
You are correct.
I feel like this is less about true crime and more about how much I pay attention to things, which clearly I don't.
It absolutely is. So,
I'm in my own little world.
okay. Question 4. We have an image of Charlie Chaplin. It's a rough, very rudimentary sketch on some white paper, and it looks like it was drawn in about 5 minutes. But Melissa, the word Charlie Chaplin at the top of the image
Mhm.
that is now gone, you cannot study it anymore. Is it written in cursive or in print?
Print.
You are correct.
Yay!
Good job. Okay. The final image. Here we have the most famous image of them all. Famous image of them all.
Yes.
Pogo the clown. Right? So you're going to get to look at it for another couple seconds. This is Pogo. Everyone knows this picture. That's not.
Mhm.
So, Melissa, which colors make up Pogo's hat?
Red,
give
white,
you
and
a hint.
blue. Oh,
You
sorry.
didn't even need a hint. It was red, white, and blue. Man, good job.
That picture I know pretty well. I honestly, I'll be real here. I forgot about the Mickey Mouse one. That just makes it so much more disturbing.
I know, right? He would draw, and he wasn't a bad artist. Like, not to venture too
Ugh.
far off topic, he
Yeah.
could draw. I mean, but it was his gift to God, gift from
Gag
God that he was
me.
giving to God. Anyway, well, great job as always. You nailed it. I'll give it
Whoop,
to you.
whoop.
And thank you, Aubrey, for suggesting a game with Gacy's paintings. And
Yes.
that does it for us this week, guys. So join us next week where we dip into a whole new block about survivors. And you're going to hear an incredible story. So stick with us as we kind of walk through the block and talk about some interesting cases, and then be prepared because she's incredible.
Yeah, she really is. Well, if anyone else has game suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. You can hit us up on Facebook, Insta, TikTok at Murder Unscripted. You can email us your suggestions. If you want to write us a letter, we would love that. But it's murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. And you can check out our website and leave suggestions on there, murderunscriptedpod.com. And as always, hug your friends, tell your family that you love them, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
Gacy was a pervert, wasn't he?
Oh, big pervert.
Man. Anyway. See ya.